Hi ladies, and welcome to the Thrive Chapter Spotlight. Today we find ourselves in Psalm 55. David is starting the psalm. He is speaking in verse 1, and he says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise." In these first two verses, David is pleading for God to hear his prayer. He is distraught with his enemy and the thoughts that he is having about his enemies. Through the chapter up into about verse 10, David goes on and talks about the activity of the evil that his enemies are partaking in. David then goes on to say in verse 16, he says, "As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me." He's speaking for himself here. He says, "Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he, God, will hear my voice." David knows that he needs God in this time of adversity of his enemies. He knows that he needs God in the evening, in the morning, and at noon. Ladies, in whatever situation God has us in right now, do you find yourself needing God in the evening and in the morning and in at noon? The awesome thing about our relationship with God now is that we don't have to wait for a certain time to call out to him or to be in a certain place to call out to him. And David knew that. He then goes on in verse 23 at the end of the chapter, and I love this. He says, "But I will trust in thee." Just a verse before, in verse 22, David is saying that even through all this, he will cast his burden upon the Lord. And he knows that God will sustain thee. And then again, he finishes the chapter and says, "But I will trust in you." Ladies, whatever situation God has us in, are we trusting God to sustain us? Are we reaching out to him like David did in evening and morning and noon? Are we calling upon God? Are we begging God to hear us and to answer our prayer? See, David knew the enemy. He knew what the enemy was capable of. He knew that the enemy was after him. Earlier in the chapter, I think it's in verse 10, he says, "Day and night they go about it upon the walls. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it." David knew what his enemies were capable of. Ladies, we're in the same boat today. Our enemies are after us. They're waiting day and night to prowl upon us. Are we pushing in and pressing into God and asking him to hear our prayer and to sustain us? But most importantly, are we trusting where God has us? Are we trusting in the ways that God is wanting to use us? Continue reading with us and have a good day.